Leading up to World War I was nationalism, imperialism, alliances, and militarism. Most countries had an intense pride for their country and wanted to expand. The immediate cause of World War I was the assassination of their heir to Austria's throne, Archduke Francis Ferdinand. He was killed on June 28, 1914, by a Serbian nationalist. Austria then blamed Serbia, and the death brought outrage worldwide. There were two sides to this great war. The Central Powers, or Triple Alliance, had main powers of Germany and Austria, and was later joined by the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. The Allies, or Triple Entente, had main powers of Great Britain, France, and Russia. After the assassination of Archduke Francis, Austria declared war on Serbia. Germany made a plan to send 75% of their army against France in order to take Paris in 6 weeks. This was called the Schieffelin Plan. To attack the French off guard, they illegally invaded Belgium, who was neutral. When Britain demanded withdrawal and Germany refused, Britain declared war on Germany. The French made a heroic stand at the Battle of Marne and threw back Germany. Two fronts took shape, the Western Front and the Eastern Front. The Western Front was very bloody, but resulted in little movement. Britain's Royal Navy imposed a blockade on Germany and Austria, starving thousands. The submarine was Germany's response and the most effective weapon. Unemployment vanished, and women were used for work too. All white men were at war, and women became important for work. World War I was a total war, meaning that it required nations to involve their people in order to carry on the fight. Countries with a lot of raw materials did better off because it helped make weapons and transportation. By 1917, European nations were suffering shortages. Britain's food supply was nearly gone because of Germany's submarine warfare, and Russia lacked supplies and had to back out of World War I. The poverty and shortages led to communist revolt. When the war began, the French and British took over the German Togo on the West African coast. The larger German colonies were conquered in 1915. Europe's African colonies had it hard too. Africans had heavy taxes and were forced to grow export crops and sell them cheap. Over 1 million Africans served in the various armies. France's shortage on young men brought them to draft Africans into the army. The one country that got rich during the war was the United States. For 2.5 years, the U.S. stayed technically neutral. The country did a lot of business with Great Britain and France for profit. The United States joined the war in 1917, making great profit. Victory gardens helped the war efforts. These were backyard gardens that grew food to save money. Africans and women were hired to defeat labor shortages. This played a major role in the migration of blacks from the south to the north. The Ottoman Empire had a secret alliance with Germany. The Ottoman Empire had hoped to gain land from Russia, but it went bad for both armies. Zionism erupted to return Jews to the Palestine through Britain. Arthur Balfour wrote the Balfour Declaration, which led to conflicts between Palestinians and Jewish settlers. Woodrow Wilson stayed out of World War I until late 1916, when German leaders decided to starve the British into submission by using submarines to sink ships carrying food supplies to Great Britain. Germany sunk one of the United States ships called the Lusitania, and this made the country outraged. On April 6, 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany. Losing hope of winning the fight, soldiers began to mutinize. In August, the Allies counterattacked and Germans retreated. Later, Kaiser Wilhelm fled to Holland and a new German government signed an armistice. On November 11th at 11 a.m., the war ended. The war left more dead and wounded and more destruction than any previous conflict. Between 8 and 10 million people died. About 20 million returned home wounded. Other than deaths, millions of refugees began. About 800,000 immigrants made it to the U.S. before immigration laws were passed in 1921 and 1924. The Great Influenza Epidemic of 1918 and 1919 was the byproduct of the war that began from soldiers on the Western Front. 1 of every 40 people died. The environment was greatly damaged by the war, as well by trenches, ammunition, chunks of concrete, soldiers' bones, and other things. In early 1919, the victorious powers had delegates meet in Paris. From the beginning, Woodrow Wilson, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, and France's George Clemenceau dominated the Paris Peace Conference. They ignored Italians, smaller European nations, Japanese, Pan-African Congress, and all other various nationalities not representing sovereign states. Wilson proposed a League of Nations, a world organization to safeguard the peace. Lloyd George and Clemenceau wanted different things. The result was a League of Nations, but the U.S. Congress refused to let the United States join. On June 28, 1919, German delegates signed the Treaty of Versailles. Germany couldn't have an air force and was permitted only 1 army and a navy. It gave parts of its land to Poland. The Allies made Germany promise to pay for their losses. Germany took responsibility for causing all loss and damage. The treaty left Germany humiliated but the most powerful nation in Europe. The cost of war devastated the economics in Europe. Germany was not able to make their payments back to England and France, causing them to not be able to repay the U.S. As the situation in Europe worsened, banks began to fail. In 1929, the economy and banking systems in the U.S. also crashed, preventing it from paying back the loans to European nations. The Great Depression made global trade diminish and the unemployment rates were high as ever. This not only affected the countries in the world, but it also private families, especially who had money invested in stocks. It affected the whole world and took the U.S. alone a decade to recover from it.